Welcome to Real Estate Investing Abundance, the show for busy, fulfilled professionals like you to learn how to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alan Lomax.
Hello, enlightened investors. Happy to be back with you again today. I'm your host, Dr. Alan. I know you'll enjoy today's show, and I have a big ask that will only take a moment of your time. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of our podcast. To leave a review and a rating, iPhone or other Apple iOS device users, go to Apple Podcasts or iTunes. For all you non-Apple device users, go to podchasers.com. On either site, search for Real Estate Investing Abundance. Once you find us, leave both a review and a rating. Subscriptions are also vital to the show's success, so please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. It's free to subscribe, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Enlightened investors, today we take a peek at a little-known aspect of real estate investing as we learn how an active real estate professional creates endless streams of leads for her real estate business with probate investing. I'm your host, Dr. Alan. For you professionals fulfilled in the work of your calling, but find yourselves too busy to delve into the minute aspects of investing for financial freedom, I know what that's like because I've experienced the same. But I have great news. I've created Steve Tucker Capital for you who don't want to spend the time looking into investments, but want to grow your investment portfolio. Steve Tucker Capital is an investment company designed for passionate professionals, fulfilled in their livelihoods, but looking for investment capital. Go there and join today the Enlightened Investor Circle, and we can share enlightened information for building wealth. That's stevetucker.com. Go there today while the opportunity is still free. Today's guest began investing in 1998, focusing on rehabbing and rentals until the market crashed in 2008, when she became an accidental wholesaler. She is a blogger and a podcaster who is best known as a marketing and branding expert, and for the expertise in probate investing. Welcome, Sharon Vornholt. Sharon, before we delve into the intricacies of probate investing, share a memorable experience from your formative years that helped you to be the person you are today.
Well, that got me to thinking. And growing up as a child, my dad was a general contractor, and being the oldest of 4 children, I was arguably the best behaved. So I got drug along on jobs with him. And that's when my love of real estate started. It wasn't really until I was grown that I realized that they had taught me a lesson, both my parents, and that was that I could do anything, that there were no barriers, only barriers that I put up in my own mind. It wasn't until I got into 2 fields that were primarily male dominated that I learned that not everyone felt the same way about that. But growing up that way, I just had a strong sense of purpose that I could succeed if I just kept at it. So I would think that would be my thing.
Well, that's quite a lesson to learn at a young age. It takes many of us much, much more time than that. But you can't really get anywhere until you actually realize the value in and of yourself there. So great lesson learned at a young age. Well, Sharon, tell us, before we get into the minutia of probate real estate and investing, explain to us what probate is.
Probate is a legal process that is pretty similar in every state around the U.S. If you can Google the probate process in your particular state to find out if there are any idiosyncrasies. But in general, the probate process, now mind you, there's a lot of going on behind the scenes with attorneys, and we don't need to be attorneys. But someone passes away, the estate is opened, and the next thing that happens is the assets are sold. And as a real estate investor, that's when you can buy the property. People mistakenly think it's after the estate is closed, but it's not. It's right at this point when the assets are sold. After that, the creditors are paid. Now, creditors would be anyone money is owed to. Certainly hospital bills, funeral expenses, attorney's expenses, in addition to anything left behind, like a mortgage. So estate is opened. Someone is appointed. It's who's going to be in charge. And once the estate is opened, it's the executor or the personal representative. And then the assets are sold, the creditors are paid, and then the heirs get what is left. And that's what makes these such motivated sellers. They don't get what they're inheriting until this whole process plays out. So that's, in a nutshell, how the process works.
So the terminology is the estate is open. And then when this estate is open, that's when the assets go on sale. And it's creditors who are paid first. And it goes, I guess, would the first creditor probably be the mortgage holder? And then on down from there, is there a hierarchy to it? How does that actually work?
I think that probably varies by state. In most states, there is a notice to creditors is put in the newspaper. I found out recently in my many years of doing probates that that's not the case in New York. Let's say you live in Illinois. They have a rule. The notice has to be put out 2 weeks in a row in the newspaper, and the creditor has to come forward within 6 months, I think it is. In some states, it's a much shorter period of time. If you live in New York, I would assume the mortgage companies, they have to look at obituaries. That would be my guess. But yes, I would say mortgages they're usually in the first position on any debt. So when the estate is opened, something happens during that period of time. And that is, of course, the will is proved, but they also determine who is going to be the decision maker. Now, if there's a will and an executor is named in the will, that's plain to see. But if not, then we're back to the hierarchy. If there's no will, then the judge is going to appoint someone called an administrator. And that person collectively is referred to as the personal representative. And that is the person that can move forward with the sale of the property. And they are, in fact, the only person that can sign on the dotted line on a contract. So it's important to know that if you're working probate, you may talk to another individual, but they can't necessarily sell the house.
So the court is going to appoint an administrator if it is not designated through the will. And what did you call that person?
Jointly, the executor, and that's called the administrator. But the executor and the administrator, it just depends on whether there's a will or not. They're jointly referred to as the personal representative for the estate. I call them the decision maker.
Okay. And so it's important, of course, to be talking with that person who can actually make that decision. Oftentimes it is families who are inheriting, and oftentimes there are not wills. So what happens when there's family squabbles? Does the court decide this is the person, or how does that play out?
The court, there is someone that is the person. Sometimes there are co-executors in the case of siblings. I've been in situations where I've had to sit down at the kitchen table with the family and have a conversation with them and that's not my preferred thing to do, but if they're squabbling and three of them want to sell and one of them doesn't want to sell, it's typically because they don't understand the house needs $40,000 worth of work. They've gotten a tax bill that says the house is worth this many dollars, and they think the house is worth that many dollars. It then becomes the job of the real estate investor to hear all the sides, I would imagine like a psychologist, and then try to find common ground and maybe change their thinking about the reality of the situation. But more than cases than not, they've agreed upon things prior to ever having that meeting with the real estate investor.
One more question here in terms of this process. You say that there has to be an announcement, except in New York State, and it has to be in the newspapers, and the creditors have to come forward. If the creditors do not come forward, do they lose their claim on that? Is there a time period on that? How does that happen?
It depends on the state. So where are you located, Alan?
In North Carolina.
North Carolina. So I would say to you, Google notice to creditors, North Carolina. And whichever state your listeners happen to be in, there could be another state that there is no notice to creditors. But since doing probate since 2008, this was the first instance I ever heard of that there was no notice to creditors, because how else are the creditors going to find out that you have a mortgage and you've passed away? But every state is a little bit different. Now, in Kentucky, it's a little bit different. But generally speaking, people have to be notified, and then they have a certain period of time to come forward. And then, yes, they're out of luck. So that's the way the process works. They have to, act on that information.
So even a mortgage holder could potentially be out of luck if they don't come forward.
Potentially, but I'm sure the mortgage companies have somebody on top of that. Yeah.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. As an industry-leading, relationship-focused, design-built construction firm, Mosaic Construction has worked in many different asset classes from multifamily to retail, medical, industrial, and commercial. Mosaic Construction works to execute interior and exterior renovations with their team of trades and project managers. Their experience with value-add improvements has resulted in increased ROI and long-term value of the assets. They work nationally in partnership with local trades to deliver thoughtful, problem-solving construction management solutions to all their clients. For a personal, no-obligation consultation, call Ira Singer, 773-491-3145, or email Ira at mosaicconstruction.net. You can also find Ira on LinkedIn.
I'm sure that they have a built-in notification there. But that's interesting. I did not realize that. So how long does it stay open, generally speaking?
What I gave you was the short and sweet path, because that's really all real estate investors need to understand. But behind the scenes, the probate attorney is filing things with the court. They're letting them know how things are going. As they sell the assets, let's say there's a property and a boat and furniture, all these things, they have to be converted to cash unless they've been directly inherited. So that all goes in what I call the pot of money. That pot of money is what they're going to use to pay everybody. So to answer your question, though, in my area, probates generally are over and done in 14, 16 months. It depends on when they open the estate. So sometimes someone will pass away and they won't open the estate for 6 months or a year. Sometimes it's fairly soon. And as part of I'm not a tax specialist, but I know this. When an estate is open, they have to get a federal EIN number. So that starts a clock as far as taxes are going. So there has to be a tax return filed on the estate itself, in addition to whatever is required of the people. So that is kind of sets a clock ticking. But I've come upon a lot of estates where persons passed away a long time ago. Then you can get into another situation where, let's say, for instance, someone passes away and there's no mortgage, there are really no bills, and nobody tells anybody. The family just moves into the house. Well, nobody finds out. And then one day somebody wants to sell the house. Well, in the situation that I'm referring to, it was in Oklahoma, and it had been 4 or 5 years. And it just so happens that Oklahoma has an expedited probate process for this situation. But if you were to Google that in your state and my state, there's over 3,300 counties in all the states, and they've each got a little bit different rules connected to them. So that's something that you need to check in your state.
And so not just go to the state level, you also have to go to the county level too.
Yes. And when you're looking for probate leads, there are over 3,300 counties in the U.S. And by and large, every one of those has a little bit different process for getting the leads. So when somebody asks for the magic button to get probate leads, I have to say there isn't one. That's why these leads are so valuable, because they take a little bit of detective work. Now, for me, I got lucky. I called my probate court and said, how can I get a list? And they said, well, we don't give that out, but it's published in your newspaper once a month. Well, there you go. So sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes it takes a little more digging. In a lot of areas, they're online. So you can Google your city or your county or your city plus the word probate. It'll just pop up. Like if you Google Harris County, Texas, and probate, that's Houston, guess what? It just pops up. It's all online. There's no way to know the process for every single county, but it's generally fairly easy to figure out.
So probably your best advice is to narrow down the areas where you want to be investing and become familiar with the probate laws within that particular region. Mm-hmm. And then also find out how it is within those regions, how it is that you can get those probate lists. So what I'm understanding here is that your lead process is actually built upon the probate lists that actually come from the county courts. And they're, of course, updating that on a continuous basis. Every time a probate comes in, they're updating that information. So that's something you're going to have to stay on top of. So how do you organize yourself in conjunction with all of that?
Well, you definitely need a CRM. This is not something you can run from Excel spreadsheets, because with probates, the marketing is very important. Most niches in real estate, you can send them a postcard or some sort of mail piece, and they'll look at it and make a decision. With probates, because of the nature, someone has passed away. So there's two facets here. Someone has passed away, so they very often are grief stricken, and it takes a little time for them to move forward. But they have to legally take care of the business of the estate. So your marketing has to be very sequential. The letters that I have within my probate course are kind of, this is who I am and this is who I can help you. And maybe next month it says, I'm just checking in to see how you're coming with the estate. You let them know how you can help them when they are ready. You'll be there when they're ready. So in order to keep all of this organized, and remember, Alan, this month in April of 2021, there's a group of probates. Next month, there's a group. Next month, there's a group. So you have to have these. I categorize them by month and year so that I know in my letter sequence which letter they're on. And then that process can be automated. The money is in the details here, and just not doing a hard sell or just being there for them and saying, I can help you with this when you're ready. And that's really the magic sauce with probates.
Well, a lot of people, I can see why people would shy away from this particular niche, because it isn't a particularly straightforward kind of niche. But other than the complexities of probate, are there other reasons that many real estate investors shy away from this?
Yes, the two things. One is they themselves don't understand the process and really how straightforward it is. They don't understand the terminology of probate. And you don't have to be an attorney, but you do need to understand 15, 20 terms. If you say the word executor, you need to know what that means. When they open the estate and they appoint this person, or that person has been named in the will, they get something called the letters. You'll hear the people talk about the letters of testamentary. All that means is that's a paper that says, Alan, you are the executor of this estate, and you can show this paper if you need to anyone that might question that. So you need a little bit of that. So number one is they don't understand the process, and it's not really that much knowledge, but it's very specific knowledge they need. And number two is their own mindset. And what I tell investors is, and this is the truth, I've gotten more hugs at probate closings than any other closings, because these people are so grateful that you help them out of this situation. Because remember, they've got their careers, their children, their soccer practice, or whatever it is they do. They've got their life. And then right in the middle of their life, this all got dumped on them. They've got to settle this estate. It's not if they're going to sell the property, it's when they're going to sell the property. So when you can come in and you can take a distressed property off of their hands, and you can say to them, take what you want out of the house and we'll take care of the rest, then they are very motivated sellers, because that's one of the big hangups with probates is all the stuff in the house. They have guilt over getting rid of these prized possessions that belong to their parents that really often have no monetary value, but they were important to them in their lives. And once real estate investors understand this process and what a valuable service we provide for these people, we allow them to go on with their lives, then it's a win-win for everyone. It just takes a little bit of a mindset tweak.
Yeah, I can see how that could be really quite rewarding, because it isn't just a business transaction at this point in time. It becomes a very personal experience for the people involved in it. And yeah, you can be there to help them not only deal with this burden that's been dumped on them, which they did not want in the first place, but you can be there as someone to understand what they're going through and help them to deal with that grieving process. So I'm assuming that maybe in a lot of these cases, the money, of course, is going to be important. It's important to all of us in various different ways, but I expect that there's something in this process for each one of these individuals other than just the money. What is that?
It's getting to move on with their life. So cleaning up the house is the biggest hang up I've found with them moving forward with the sale of the property. But getting this off their plate, because oftentimes there's been a period that came before someone passed away. So they may have been a caretaker for their parent. You just don't know what their situation is. But at the end of the day, they just want to settle this and move on with their life. And this is also a case of these are not all distressed properties. They are what I call time and circumstances situations. For instance, if the executor lives in California and the parent or relative that's deceased is in New York, it becomes a physical problem for them to personally go back and do this. So if they can get a cash offer and they can fly in and get what they want out of the property, open the process, go back to California, they're more than happy to take a reduced price for the convenience and just to move forward.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Would you ever invest all your money in a single stock? Very unlikely. Yet investors are willing to risk $50,000 to $100,000 in a single property in real estate all the time. Avestor is the world's first customizable real estate investment platform. Investors can build their own custom portfolios selecting investments across multiple asset classes such as single-family homes, multifamily, student housing, self-storage, and shopping centers. You can also invest across multiple markets and different time frames. Avestor also enables other real estate entrepreneurs and syndicators to build and use Avestor's infrastructure and cloud platform to create their own customizable real estate funds. To learn more, visit us at avestorinc.com. Avestor, real estate investing made simple.
I can say this is not something that would be just limited to single-family homes, that people inherit commercial properties and they find themselves in the same situations. Mm-hmm. Their parents were running and operating multifamily apartments, mobile home parks, storage facilities, maybe even hotels, different kinds of things. And the children live in a different state and have no desire to take on this business. And suddenly it's been thrust upon them. And they're going to have to make a decision as to what to do with that. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of ways I think that people could help people going through these situations and to help them get on with their lives and put this behind them in the best ways possible there. Well, Sharon, talk to us a little bit about how you brand yourself in this business and what are some of the things you do to set yourself apart?
Well, I've had a blog since 2010. I tell people way back before we knew what the heck we were doing. And I started a podcast in 2013 solely for the purpose of helping people to avoid the mistakes I had made, but to kind of document my journey. And along the way, I've started to focus a lot on probates, and I teach marketing and branding as well, because if you're an investor and you have a website and you want to work in probates, you don't need a whole probate website, but you do need a page that says, I'm Sharon, and this is how I can help you. This is how I can make this easier for you. So I've branded myself by, I created a course, Probate Investing Simplified. I hold lots of free trainings, in-person trainings and things like that. But all around all of those, much like you've done with your podcast, if you do all of this very purposefully, you build a brand over time. But your brand is certainly colors and all of the physical aspects. But at the end of the day, your brand is how people feel about you. It's what they say about you and the feeling you leave them with. So if you focus on that, and I come from a place of service. While we all want to make money, there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, from a branding perspective, if you show up as the expert at whatever your niche is, whatever you do, it's no different than being a physician or an attorney or whatever. You have to create an online presence for yourself. That is the number one thing you have to do today. You must create an online presence for yourself, because the way real estate used to work was they would get your marketing piece and then they would decide whether or not they were going to call you. They would hear about you. Now there's a step in the middle. They hear about you, or they get your marketing piece, or they come upon your website, and then they Google you. And then they stalk you online, and then they decide if you make the cut to go on their short list. So if I had to tell people one thing you need to know about branding is you have to have one. You can do that. You don't have to have a podcast. You don't have to have a blog. You have to create some kind of content. That might be a podcast. It might also be YouTube videos or videos you just put on Facebook to begin with. Video is, by the way, the fastest way to build a brand of all. Podcasting and blogs, they take some time to build readership, but video is probably going to be within just a couple of years, the number one source over all the other ones. So as an investor, you can do a walkthrough of a property. You can do a million different things that are totally unsophisticated with your phone. But if you do that consistently, you get known as the person who looks at a lot of houses. It's all kind of very organic, but you have to have some thought behind it. But for me, I just wrote about, talked about, taught a lot about probates. And that's how I built my brand around probates and marketing and branding. Because marketing is how you get leads, but branding is why they choose you. So if you remember that statement, it's kind of like trying to be a married couple and only having either a husband or a wife. It just doesn't work. So marketing is how you get leads, but branding is why they choose you. And that's why you build an online presence.
I like that. I'm going to have to remember that. So marketing is how we get leads, and branding is why they choose us. So not only do we have to do our marketing, but we have to have a brand. I am assuming that branding needs to be something that speaks not just to what you do in probate, but branding has got to be something that speaks to who you are as a person.
Absolutely.
Talk to us a little bit about how a person can ferret that out. How can they define their brand? How can they pinpoint what is their brand?
I think people do business with people. They don't do business with companies. While they may remember a company name, they're likely not going to remember that as much as they're going to remember the person. So it's about them identifying with you, not only as a real estate investor, but as a real person. So if you are building out, we'll say an About Me page on your website or another profile on another site, sure, you should talk about not about yourself, and I've got 18 degrees and all of that, but you should say, I'm a real estate investor and I specialize in the niche of probates. I help people with estates, and here's how I can help you. So that needs to be the focus, because it really is all about them. It's all about them, and they want to know you're competent and that you can close the deal and all of that. But at the end of the day, they want to know what's in it for them. And then down toward the bottom, I love it when people put a picture of them with their child or their grandchild or their dog. And they might say, and I coach my son's basketball team in my spare time. Or the cookie mom for my daughter's Girl Scout team. But there's got to be some shred of something in there that says you're a real person, because they have to be able to identify with you and feel like you're just like them. You may be in this doing this different thing, but at the end of the day, you are just like them. And so they are comfortable doing business with you.
Like those pointers about branding, it's not easy to find a brand. And so those are good pointers. I appreciate that. And that's getting away from the branding aspect to this and getting back to actually working with the people in the probate. Give us some tips on how to carry out a comfortable and meaningful conversation with people who are going through this probate process.
So your first contact with them would likely be a telephone call. I found with probates, they don't tend to fill out online forms on your website as much, although some might. But one way or another, you're going to talk to them on the telephone and begin that process then. And I usually just get the basic information, and I'll start out and say, tell me about your situation, and then tell me about the house. And I'll start to fill in the gaps on my sheet. And then I'll suggest a meeting that, I'll meet them at the house. And this is where you can really make it easy. This is where investors say, I don't know how to talk to a seller that's experienced the death of a parent that has really been hard for them. And I'd say, look at this as an opportunity to help them. And when you go in the house, I look for visual clues. Now, what do I mean by that? I always just greet them, introduce myself. I give them a business card, and I always just say, tell me about the house. And they'll start to walk me through the house and say, this is where I had all my Christmases, or this is where I grew up. They'll start the conversation. And then while they're doing that, I'm looking around the house. Now I'll look for a clue. If I see golf clubs in the corner and I know their dad has passed away, I'll say, oh, was your dad the golfer? And that's either a yes or no. And if it's a yes, they tell you a story. They like to tell you stories. You have to just be a good listener. And there's nothing weird at all about this process. I remember going into a house and there were cookbooks everywhere. And I said to the lady, it was her daughter, and I said, oh, was your mom the cook? And she said, yes. And then she started telling me about all the holidays, and they have this need to talk. That's their way of dealing with this. They talk about their experiences, and then they'll say, oh, you ready to see the house? Well, sure. You want to show me the house? But just ask questions. And by the time you leave there, if you've let them have their conversation, you've been a good listener, you've asked questions when it's time to ask questions about the condition of the house. That is not when you first get at the house, by the way. It becomes a really easy conversation. And you only have to do this a couple of times to get really very good at it. Because remember, they're just as scared about having this to talk about this as you are. So if you can just find a common ground, something, it's much like any other conversation. It's just a conversation. And if you know your stuff when it comes to probates, if you can stand up and walk in that door and feel like an expert, then you're going to be miles ahead of the next investor or 2 or 5 that come in the door. That's just the way it works.
Enlightened investors will be right back after this important announcement. I have a big ask that will only take a moment of your time. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of our podcast. So to leave a review, iPhone or other Apple iOS device users, go to Apple Podcasts or iTunes. For all you non-Apple device users, go to podchasers.com. On either platform, search for Real Estate Investing Abundance. Once found, please leave a review and a rating. Subscriptions are also vital to our show's success, so please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. It is free to subscribe, and you can unsubscribe at any time.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the first step is that you really need to be very familiar with the probate process. You don't ever need to talk about it. No. You just need to know it, and then just be there to essentially be their shoulder to cry on in some respects, and let them tell their story. Yeah, I think that's something that all of us could do with just a little bit of humanity. I like how you framed that as this is a service. It isn't here just as a business, but you're here to provide a service for people who are very definitely in need of your assistance there.
I would say, too, that is something to remember if you're looking at pre-foreclosures or a creative finance deal or any kind of a deal. If you approach that deal as a learning experience for you and hearing the seller out, you're much more likely to be able to come to an agreement, even if you're way off in the beginning. You can begin to close that gap simply by just being a good listener and finding out what it is they really need to move forward. Because sure, they may say, I have to have this much money, but really it's almost always a situation they want to change.
Right. Yeah. Well, excellent advice there. Before we go into our last segment here, you have some things for our viewers and listeners. You have a quick start probate guide. So tell us about the guide and how it is that we can get that.
Yes, you can get that by going to probateinvestingsimplified.com/starter kit. That's a link I created for this so that it's easy to remember. And what you get in that is it's the basics of what you need to get a very basic understanding of probate. So the roadmap that we talked about, the actual steps, I have out in a graphic that if you want to work probate, you can stick them up on a wall or in a drawer or wherever. And I talk about each one of those steps. I've got a sample letter in there. I've got everything that you really need to get started in probates. Now, with that being said, I also explain why probates is such a great opportunity. That is a starting point. I would recommend that you dive in and learn on my blog, the Louisville Gals Real Estate blog. There's a link there off to the podcast. I have a ton of free information on probates over there. So go over there and just learn. Make it your goal to become very knowledgeable. And I would go so far as to say to become the expert in probates, because with this handout, it'll just make everything so much easier for you.
And viewers and listeners, we will have that in the show notes, but that is probateinvestingsimplified.com/starter kit. And it's free. Go there today. Mm-hmm. And whether you're planning to invest in probates or not, probates are something that probably all of us are going to have to deal with at some point in time in our life. And so the more familiar we are with it, when that is thrust upon us, it doesn't have to be a great big surprise. So take some time. Go visit Sharon's site and pick up free information that she has put together for us. So Sharon, let's go into our last segment here. Share with us one of your most difficult setbacks in life. How did you come through that time, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, for me, that was in 2008. I had another business, which I closed in 2008, was real estate related. And also I was an active rehabber and buy and hold landlord at that time. And suddenly, as a rehabber, if you remember that time, no one could get a retail mortgage. So I had a couple of houses that I had bought and had not yet started. And I'm thinking, what the heck am I going to do? I'm going to rehab these houses and then they may sit there, and I'm thinking holding costs and forever. And that's when I kind of moaned around a little bit. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to look at this as an opportunity. I've never wholesaled a single house. So what if I just I'm really good at generating leads. That was kind of my superpower. I was really good at marketing. So I'll just generate leads. And there were still people that were rehabbing that were okay with letting the houses sit there however long. So I just started wholesaling at that time. And while it was very easy for me, because I'd been in the business part-time at that time for 10 years while I had the other business, it's not a strategy I particularly recommend, I'll say it's not always easy because you need a buyer's list. And I had a built-in buyer's list. I had 10 years of contacts, and I literally could call up someone and say, do you want to buy this house? And they would say, sure. The other thing that I did, though, was I found out very quickly that what it makes a good rehab deal and doesn't necessarily make a good buy and hold deal. So one of my investor buyers said, you've not really dealt with this, but in case I can't sell this house, I have to be able to, it has to be able to cash flow. So he educated me on really changing my buying criteria to it. When from that point on, it had to be able to cash flow. Didn't matter if you could make $40,000 as a rehab. If it wouldn't cash flow, then it was a no-go for me. So that was a time that I got a little bummed out, but then I just did a pivot and it all worked out fine.
Yeah, 2008 was a tough time for many of us. Not a time I want to go back to for sure. Well, what in your life are you most grateful for these days?
I am most grateful for my health. I had a little bit of a problem recently and turned out fine. But Amy Porterfield, who has the online business podcast, she has a saying, and she says all the time, your health is your wealth. And I've stuck that up on my refrigerator because you have to. Sometimes we get so caught up in working that the health or the exercise or the whatever is going to come later. And I would say that needs to probably be at the top of the list. So I'm very, very happy that my health is good.
Yes, we can take our health for granted until that day, then suddenly we cannot. Mm-hmm. And I need to listen to that. I am not taking care of myself as I should these days. There's just too much on my plate, but I need to change that. Thanks for that reminder. I appreciate that. Well, imagine that you have come to the end of your life, and as you lay on your deathbed, what will you look back on with your greatest joy and sense of fulfillment and satisfaction?
Well, other than my children and my one granddaughter, my only granddaughter, I would say that the thing I'll look back on most is that I would like to be remembered that I was sort of a trailblazer for other women. I would like to be remembered that way because it truthfully has not been easy for women in this business. It's been kind of a rough go. And I would hope that through my blog and through my podcast and through all of the things that I do, that I would give them the hope, or not the hope, but the distinct knowledge that they too can do this business, that it's not limited to by your age or your sex or your education, that it is open and available to everyone.
Quite a legacy to leave behind there. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise and wisdom. It has indeed been a very enlightening experience for me, and I'm sure it has been for our viewers and listeners. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Alan.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Seed Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Seed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Seed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at seedtalker.com.